The Gaza Strip, a narrow piece of land along the Mediterranean Sea, is once again embroiled in violence. Home to more than 2 million Palestinians, Gaza has been under Israeli blockade for over 15 years, its borders tightly controlled. Recent escalations in the conflict have brought about a new wave of destruction and despair. Rockets fired from Gaza have reached deep into Israel, while Israeli airstrikes have pounded the densely populated enclave, destroying buildings and infrastructure. The situation is dire, with civilians caught in the crossfire and international calls for a ceasefire largely ignored. At the heart of the latest eruption lie claims and counterclaims about captured soldiers. Hamas, the militant group that governs Gaza, claims to be holding Israeli soldiers captive, fueling tensions with Israel. Israel, in turn, demands their unconditional release, launching military operations that have resulted in Palestinian casualties and widespread destruction. Caught between the two sides are the people of Gaza, facing a humanitarian crisis of immense proportions. Hospitals are overwhelmed, essential supplies are dwindling, and the constant fear of airstrikes has left many fearing for their lives. The International Court of Justice, the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, has issued a ruling demanding an end to the violence and calling for the protection of civilians. Israel accuses Hamas of using civilians as human shields, deliberately placing military targets within civilian areas. Hamas, in turn, argues that its actions are a legitimate response to Israeli aggression, a struggle for freedom and self-determination. The back-and-forth accusations highlight the deep mistrust and animosity that fuel the conflict, making a peaceful resolution all the more elusive. Each side demonizes the other, justifying its actions as necessary and proportionate. The impact of the conflict on civilians has been devastating. Thousands of homes have been destroyed, leaving families displaced and desperate. Schools, hospitals, and essential infrastructure have been damaged or destroyed, crippling Gaza's already fragile economy. The constant fear and uncertainty have taken a heavy toll on the mental health of the population, particularly children who have known nothing but war and hardship. International reactions to the escalating violence have been mixed. Some countries have condemned Hamas for its rocket attacks, while others have criticized Israel for its disproportionate use of force. The United States, a staunch ally of Israel, has blocked attempts at the United Nations to issue a joint statement calling for a ceasefire. The lack of a unified international response has only emboldened the warring parties, perpetuating the cycle of violence. The ICJ ruling, while largely symbolic, carries moral weight and underscores the international community's condemnation of the ongoing violence. The court's call for an end to hostilities and the protection of civilians serves as a reminder of the human cost of the conflict. However, without a mechanism for enforcement, the ruling alone is unlikely to bring about a lasting ceasefire. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is dire and deteriorating rapidly. Hospitals are struggling to cope with the influx of casualties, with essential medical supplies dwindling. The destruction of infrastructure has disrupted access to clean water, sanitation, and electricity, exacerbating the already precarious living conditions. The United Nations has warned of a looming humanitarian catastrophe if the fighting continues. International aid organizations are struggling to provide assistance to those in need, hampered by the ongoing violence and restricted access. The Israeli blockade has severely limited the flow of goods and people in and out of Gaza, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis. The international community must pressure both sides to allow for the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid and to ensure the safety of aid workers. The current escalation is the latest chapter in a long and bloody conflict. The roots of the conflict run deep, stemming from historical grievances, competing territorial claims, and the displacement of Palestinians. Decades of failed peace negotiations, coupled with a lack of trust and understanding, have only exacerbated the tensions. The Gaza Strip, once a vibrant hub of Palestinian life, has been transformed into an open-air prison. The Israeli blockade, in place since 2007, has crippled the economy, stifled development, and deprived its residents of basic freedoms. This blockade has been widely condemned as collective punishment, further fueling resentment and anger among Palestinians. The ongoing violence has also fueled a surge in anti-Semitism around the world, with reports of attacks on Jewish communities and individuals. It is crucial to condemn both the violence in Gaza and the rise in anti-Semitism. recognizing that they are distinct but interconnected issues. Conflating the two only serves to further divide and polarize. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza demands urgent international attention. The international community must pressure both sides to agree to an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, allowing for the delivery of humanitarian aid and the evacuation of the wounded. Failure to act decisively will have catastrophic consequences for the civilian population. The international community must also work towards a just and lasting solution to the conflict. This requires addressing the root causes, including the Israeli occupation, the blockade, and the plight of Palestinian refugees. A sustainable peace can only be achieved through dialogue, compromise, and a commitment to international law. The conflict in Gaza is a stark reminder of the human cost of political failure. The international community has a moral obligation to act, to protect civilians, and to work towards a peaceful resolution. Failure to do so will only perpetuate the cycle of violence and suffering. As the bombs continue to fall and the death toll mounts, the future for the people of Gaza looks increasingly bleak. Trapped in a cycle of violence and despair, they are at the mercy of forces beyond their control. The international community must act now to end the bloodshed and to create the conditions for a just and lasting peace. The ongoing conflict in Gaza is not just a Palestinian tragedy, it is a global tragedy. It is a stain on the conscience of humanity. The world must not stand idly by as innocent lives are lost and a humanitarian catastrophe unfolds. The time for action is now. The conflict in Gaza is a complex and multifaceted issue with no easy solutions. However, one thing is clear. The status quo is unsustainable. The international community must work together to find a way forward, one that ensures the security of both Israelis and Palestinians and brings an end to the cycle of violence.